Oi, Rusty.
Oi, Fernando. Hi, everyone.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to slightly adjust my phone. Can you hear me okay,
Yeah,
Rusty? Yeah?
I
Excellent.
can.
Thank
And
you.
thanks for having me here.
Oh, thank you for accepting my invitation. I'm really excited about our chat. So I'm
Same.
just going to start introducing myself briefly, maybe to your followers who don't know me. So my name is Fernando. I'm a Brazilian Portuguese teacher, and I was born in Brazil. I was born in Porto Alegre, Rio Grande do Sul. That's the south of Brazil. And after I graduated from university, I came to London, and I've been living here for about 20 years now, and I've been teaching Brazilian Portuguese for about the same amount of time. And my website, my blog is funwithbrazilianportuguese.com. There's plenty of free material there for people who are learning Brazilian Portuguese, so check that out. Now, Rusty, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Well, I'm born and raised in Brazil. I currently live in Aracaju, and I actually study engineering in school. I'm doing my master's in computer science now, but I'm a language enthusiast, and I love getting to know people from different places, and that's how I decided to teach Portuguese. I started about 4 years ago on YouTube, and now I also manage this page on Instagram, and I just love teaching Portuguese.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to talk briefly about how this live is going to work, what we're going to be talking about. So this is not going to be a lesson. We're not going to be teaching anything specifically. What we're going to be talking about is the mindset, things that people should bear in mind before start learning Brazilian Portuguese. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about are quite general. They can be applied to any language, really, but we will, as much as possible, make a link to Brazilian Portuguese, things that are specific to the language. So Rusty and I, we got together a few days ago, and we were talking about, we made a list of things that we think people should be aware of when start learning the language. So Rusty, I don't know if you'd like to start maybe with one of the items on our list.
Yeah, we could actually start with the importance of learning, when you learn new vocabulary, to associate a word with a gender. So if you think of a word with a gender, like this word is feminine, this word is masculine. For example, instead of learning the word casa, you learn a casa, because it's not just about a casa. The gender of the word, it's going to change pronouns, like possessive pronouns. You're not going to have to take that much time thinking, should I say meu casa or minha casa? If you learn a casa, these things will come more naturally. So whenever you learn a new word, you should probably learn with the article, the definite article, because it's just one word, one letter. It's either or a, and it's probably make your life much easier if you have to remember.
Yes, I think that's crucial. It's common for people to make mistakes regarding the gender, and because, I mean, sometimes a word might look like feminine, for example, like Gia, which ends with an A, and that's a general rule. If a word ends with an A, it tends to be feminine, but Gia is a masculine noun. So that will impact on when you say good morning, let's say bom dia instead of boa dia. So you need the adjective bom instead of boa. So that's one example. So yes,
Just
so vocabulary.
like the other word, like foto. Foto ends with O, which is generally masculine, but it's a feminine word. Eu vou tirar uma foto. I'll take a picture, not
That's
uma
right.
foto.
That's right, because foto is actually the short of fotografia, which does end with an A, but when people see the short version, it ends with an O, and people think it's masculine. So yeah. I will make from the grammatical gender, talking about grammar as well. I think one of the things that people, when start learning the language, and they realize after a while, is that the grammar, the Portuguese grammar, what they learn in the grammar doesn't always correspond to what people say in real life, how Brazilians
Mm-hmm.
speak, because Brazilians have a very sort of flexible approach to the grammar. So I think that's a crucial thing to bear in mind when learning the grammar, when learning Brazilian Portuguese in general, because don't people tend to be too fixated on what the grammar says, and then they can't understand what Brazilians are saying because it doesn't always match
Mm-hmm.
the grammar. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, they feel like, did I learn all those things I learned are wrong? I mean,
Yeah,
how can I say something and not being understood if I learn exactly how it was in the textbook? But language is something that is always evolving, right? So it is adapting and it changes. You have to follow that in order to be understood. If you want to speak clearly, you have to keep some of the things in mind. And that brings us to another point, which is it is important to uh, keep in contact with real authentic material. Because if you are following authentic material, you know how people are talking now. You
hmm
know what you should bring from the textbooks and what you shouldn't, how things changed over the time.
Also, there's a big difference, I think, in Brazil, especially again, about formal and informal language. It's almost as if there's two separate languages.
What it's funny is that if you be when you write something and you sound a little bit formal when you're talking to someone that it's actually close to you, you might even sound rude. It's like, why are you talking
Yes.
to me like this? Shouldn't
Yeah.
you be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And I mean, when I'm writing, I always have that at the back of my mind. Am I sounding too formal? And then when you start adapting to a more informal language, then you start worrying about whether it will be seen as a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, is that person going to think that I don't know my grammar?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think, for us, we're talking about this, and we are Brazilians. We worry about these things. Imagine for someone who's actually learning the language, how confusing that might
Yeah.
be. Uh,
I was having
um,
a conversation with a friend these days, and we were discussing the use of fewer and less in English. I mean, in the
mhm,
UK, it's very distinct, while in the
mhm,
US, many people use less when they should use fewer. And
mhm.
then when I mostly talk to people from the United States, so when I have to use fewer, I'm like, should I sound more natural or should I sound more
Yeah.
grammatically correct? There's always this thing that I keep in mind. Depending
Yes,
on
and
who I'm talking to, I'll make a choice.
yeah, no, that's right. And also, but now that you've mentioned, the difference between British English and American English, I think people tend to think that European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese is just the same in terms of the difference. Oh, it's like British English and American, just some difference in vocabulary and the accent. But I think it's a lot. The difference is a lot bigger than that. It's much more than that. It's because I think English and American English, yes, there are some differences in vocabulary and grammar, not so much. It's kind of, there's a lot there, but I think European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese are a lot different, not just in terms of the accent, but the grammar usage as well, as we mentioned before.
And on top of that, we have like different vowel sounds because the Brazilians tend to pronounce longer vowels than the Portuguese. So it's confusing sometimes to understand some words, while for Portuguese people, on top of the influence that they have on soap operas, they also get to hear more clearly what we were saying, what we're trying to say.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I think the Brazilian Portuguese as well. The intonation is different. It's a lot more. People say like almost like it's sung. It's like a like singy
There are
type of.
curves,
Yeah,
ups and downs.
and so the intonation is another thing on our list that we need to talk about is in the sense that, my students, I don't know, you probably have seen that before. A lot of my students, when they're practicing something, they focus so much on the pronunciation that they sometimes forget about the intonation and how you say it, because Brazilians are very expressive with the language. Like what occurs to me now is the word nossa, which is used as an interjection of wow. So, but you can't just say nossa. It's nossa. Nossa, que legal. So, of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think when I'm teaching, I tend to kind of make people to exaggerate that and then cut back, which is easier, I think. You go really over the top and then cut back a little bit. Then you get closer to the intonation.
Oh, there was this nossa, like, without any expression, nossa. It's like, it didn't impress me at all. It's like, wow, with a straight face. It completely changes the meaning of what you're saying.
That's right, yes. It could be like sarcastic, or nossa.
Yeah.
And also, I think, so in terms of the intonation, I think in English, because when you ask, for example, are you Brazilian? So you've got are you, so it changes the order there, as opposed to you are Brazilian, which would be the statement. So in Portuguese, the order is the same. So você é brasileira. So that order is the same whether you are making a statement or a question. So if you don't do the intonation of a question, it's going to sound like a statement. You are Brazilian. So when I practice, most of the times as well, when we're practicing questions, I have to say, okay, now that's fine, you got the pronunciation right, but it sounded like a statement. Now say it again, make it sound like a question. So você é brasileira?
So that's perfect. And even in shorter sentences like tudo bem, which is one of the first people learn, it's like tudo bem. It's okay. Tudo bem? You're asking the person, are you okay? How are you doing? Even in the tiniest sentence, we say that.
Yeah, that's right. Tudo bem? Tudo bem. Question and answer. Yeah, definitely. What about, so we talked about authentic materials so that you can see how language is used in real life, but also how important it is to find, even at the beginning when you start learning the language, find a partner, a language partner to practice. And I'm sure when you studied English, that's how you started. Is that right?
Exactly. I started making real progress in English when I found language partners. So even if you don't have like complex conversations, even if you talk to a bunch of people, like the real basics, hi, I'm this person, I'm from this place, I like to do these things, you get used to repeating the same things and it becomes natural to you. So it's really important to start talking to someone from day one if you can. It's really important. And the good thing is that we are many, like Brazilians, there are over 200 million Brazilians in the world. So it's not going to be hard for you to find a language partner. And most of all, you're really welcoming, really nice people in general. And we like to help you learn a language. We get really excited when we see that you're trying to learn a language. We are going to make mistakes regardless of our level. I mean, we make mistakes when you're A1 level to C2 level. It's natural, and we don't have to be afraid of that. We learn from our mistakes. And having a person to help us with that from the beginning, we started correcting some of our mistakes earlier. So if you don't repeat that mistake over and over again, it's going to be easier to get rid of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one thing, though, that I think we need to talk about, which I've had people telling me, is that people are they get a bit self-conscious when they're practicing with Brazilians, because Brazilians tend to laugh a lot and smile. So what I say to to my students when they say that to me is that Brazilians, they're probably laughing with you and not at
Not at
you.
you.
Because if you think about it, it's funny sometimes when you make a mistake. I mean, you as well, I'm sure. I made funny mistakes, and I still do. My son sometimes he laughs at me when I make English mistakes, when I mispronounce a word, and he's 8 years old, and we laugh together, and we just, have a laugh about it. So it's about not being too serious and laughing at yourself as well.
Indeed. And the other way around is true as well, because if you're Brazilian, you're talking to someone and the person doesn't laugh, I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't he or she having fun with me? What's going on with them?
That's right.
It's a cultural difference that we have to understand before we start talking to each other and find a balance between the two, maybe.
What else have we not talked about?
I would like to go back a little to authentic material, because the language learning community is it's growing a lot on Instagram, and people follow these pages, but it's important to also follow other pages. Like, if you like photography, follow a Brazilian photographer. If you like comics, follow a page that posts comics in Portuguese. I mean, it's not going to take too much of your time. It's not like you're going to spend half an hour watching a video lesson or anything like that. And you're constantly in contact with this kind of information. And when it comes to TV shows, for example, because Brazilians producing more and more TV shows, because it seems the success of other international TV shows like La Casa de Papel, for example, and Korean TV shows. So I think there are currently 20 TV shows being produced, and they're going to be released next year. So it's great. And one thing that I like about TV shows, in contrast with movies, it's that they normally tend to talk about, they're focused on one theme. So you're going to be constantly listening to a vocabulary. It's going to be repeated over and over along the episodes. So it's not like you're not only going to hear that and get used to those sounds, but if you already know that vocabulary, it's going to be easier to connect and understand and learn new vocabulary from that. Another thing that I forgot about authentic material is, one thing that I find interesting is that if I learn something, for example, booking a flight in another language, then I go to a page of an airline in that language and try to book. I try to see which words I recognize, which ones I don't, and read small text. It's really effective.
Yeah, that's a good tip. What else? I think one thing that we haven't talked about is the similarity with Spanish.
True.
Because a lot of people, when sometimes they already speak Spanish and they think, oh, it's going to be easy to learn Portuguese because they're very similar.
Not that much.
Not that much.
You need to be aware of the differences.
Yes, yeah. I think it can help, but because of the similarities, but it can make it hard because as well of the differences, because you think that it's similar, but it's actually not. It's something completely different in terms of vocabulary and grammar as well. So,
indeed. Gender, the use of prepositions, for example.
Yeah,
it's all a bit different.
And I think having that awareness from the beginning, it helps. So kind of not to rely too much, or not at all if they can, on their Spanish, because sometimes if they don't know a word, they might risk the Spanish word that they think it's going to be the same. It might work, it might not.
Sometimes the meaning is completely different, and you end up thinking you understood the person, and then you really didn't.
What else do we have? I think we've talked about most of the things. I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to go back to, or if we have any questions?
Do we? Let me check. I think someone asked something about pronunciation a while ago.
How can we change our accent
Yeah.
and practice about it? So I'm not sure whether they mean change the accent from European Portuguese, if they've learned that, into Brazilian, or I'm not sure change accent in what sense.
If that's the case, I think the best solution is to start shadowing. Look for authentic material and start shadowing someone, and then get used to the new sounds, and then eventually you're gonna end up pronouncing words more like an European or a Brazilian speaker.
Yeah. There's a website called Forvo. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I love Forvo.
Yeah, Forvo. It's great because you can select. So if you select Portuguese, you also get to select from which country, so that you know for sure that the accent you're hearing is from Brazil. And even you can see the area in Brazil, which area they're from, so you can hear the different accents about pronouncing the same word. And so that's
I always
really
recommend that website.
Yeah. Anything else you think we should mention?
I can't think of anything right now, and I don't think we have. Do we have any questions? No.
I think maybe we'll wrap it up, and I hope it's been useful to people who have been watching this either live or if you're watching this on replay. And if you have any comments about what we've said, just let me and Rusty know. We'd love to hear from everyone. And maybe the next one we'll do the whole thing in Portuguese.
It would be great for them to practice some listening, to hear lots of a gente instead of
lots of a gente, yeah. And they'll be able to hear my accent and your accent as well. Muito obrigado, Rusty. And,
Muito obrigada, Fernando. It was a real pleasure talking to you today.
It was great. It was great chatting to you. Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado, pessoal. Obrigada. Tchau, tchau.
Obrigada.
Tchau.
Tchau.